Healthcare is too expensive. Employers are offsetting costs onto their employees. Who will make health benefits affordable for hardworking Americans and their families? You will. This is the Empowering Plans Podcast, a show dedicated to helping you once again emphasize the benefit in benefit plan. Now prepare to learn, plan, save, and protect with the Phia Group.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Empowering Plans with the Phia Group. As you know, this is the CEO and co-founder of Phia, Adam V. Russo, Esquire. Yes, I am the CEO. And I like to call this the Book of Russo. It's our third edition of Book of Russo. We've had nothing but great information, great feedback as relates to the first two. But what many of you said is, Adam, we want another high-powered speaker. We want you to interview someone who's just the baddest, coolest guy when it comes to the self-funded industry. So I sat there for about 10 seconds. It was a Saturday night. It was 11:05 p.m. Eastern time, and I happened to have my phone while I was drinking a Manhattan on the rocks. And all of a sudden, I looked down at my phone, and I see the My Health Guide newsletter. Promptly at 11 o'clock Eastern time on a Saturday night, coming into my inbox with the latest, greatest news about the self-insurance industry. So I said, wait a second. It's Ernie. Ernest A. Clevenger III is the guy that I have to bring on an interview for the Book of Russo podcast. So I reached out to Ernie, and the first thing he says is, of course, I'd be honored. Let me know when. So with me today is the president of CareHere and the man, the myth, the legend behind the My Health Guide, Mr. Ernie Clevenger. Say hello, Ernie.
Hello, Ernie, and hello, Adam.
I love it. The guy knows what he's doing. He obviously listens to the webinar. Mr. Clevenger is the president of CareHere, a Brentwood-based company providing on-site medical, wellness, and pharmacy management for public and private employers. But many of you know him more for the weekly My Health Guide newsletter, which goes out to over 5,000 subscribers. The newsletter provides a compilation of selected articles impacting TPAs, stop-loss carriers, MGUs, self-funded employers, and anyone, just anyone, that's interested in the self-funded medical and workers' comp arena. Listen, my friend, thank you. I'm honored that you're here with us today. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind. And if you don't mind, my first question, why Saturday night, 11 o'clock? What made that time so special that you wanted that newsletter to go out promptly at 11 every week?
There are times when, Adam, you and several others wake up on a Sunday morning, you have coffee, you're waiting to go to church, to synagogue, whatever, and that newsletter could be useful. It carries a date of the following day, which is Monday, but I always wanted to be on time and available so that if the Sunday has leisure and there's reading activity, then it's available.
Now, a couple of things about it, if you don't mind. I'm going to be very honest here, very critical potentially, all right? So don't take it the wrong way. But you haven't changed the look of it at all. Not once, have you? I mean, if you don't mind sharing with the audience how much it's grown over time. You have over 5,000 subscribers now. How much was it at the beginning? What made you come up with it? And it's got that very unique antique type look. I mean, it's a very old school looking newsletter. And you know that. I'm assuming that you've been told that. And there's a reason for the way it looks, whether it's you want to continue that tradition. Just any feedback you relate as to how much it's grown, why you started it, and why you have that old school look and feel to it still.
Adam, thank you. It is an old school look. However, I'm always listening. If you says here is a new model, a new template, a new look that should be considered, I'm open to it. If it will achieve the job of helping our self-funded industry move forward, become educated, become more aware, I'm game. I remember probably 20 years ago, there was no table of content. And Fred Hunt, who was at the time president of SPBA, called and said, Ernie, I have to ramble through this entire newsletter. Why don't you do a table of contents? I said, great idea. It was born because of Fred. And I'm indebted to him for making that comment. So, Adam, by you saying that it's old school and needs to be refreshed, then so be it. I'll spend some time looking at it. I've always been a fan of the Wall Street Journal and its old school look. And when it went to new school, I thought it lost some of the character, even though the writing is absolutely superb.
Right.
Now, to your question about how did it start? It started maybe 30, 35 years ago when I was collecting articles, making a copy and sending them through email to employees. That was back when I was a managing general underwriter and president of a life company called American Progressive Life. I was a stop loss underwriter. We found that the articles did help stay current. They, in turn, shared it with their friends and colleagues, business partners, and it grew through viral organic growth. Today, as you said, there's over 5,000, and there's maybe another pass along readership that makes it even higher. Every subscriber is a request. There are no lists that are purchased, and it continues to grow on its own. I do cull it, reduce or purge the list periodically based on the following formula. If you're not a new subscriber, if you've been a subscriber for at least 3 months and you've not opened a newsletter for the past 6 months, then you're culled, only for active readers.
Wow,
So
that makes the number even more impressive.
yeah, the subscribers over time, I think the total number is around 15,000. That's in the entire catalog. So thank you for listening to that long answer.
No problem at all. So a couple of questions I have, if you don't mind. Now, obviously, where you make your bread and butter, right, isn't from the newsletter. It's CareHere. So CareHere currently operates, I think it's over 170 clinics, over 23 states. How that has grown over time, and what do you attribute the success of the growth to? And it can't just be one thing. We all know that. But shed some light on what your idea was when that first one was created and how it's got to where it is today.
Well, where it is today is owned by Premise Health. In fact, the legal moniker is CareHere, a Premise Health company. We sold the company to Premise Health in October of 2020. I remain with Premise Health and still working with transition to make certain that clients and employees have as smooth a transition as possible. The company was born 20 years ago, and the idea was to look at the 3 P's that sit around a table, figuratively, in order to prove health. First is the patient, the second is the provider, and the third is the payer. Is there a way to have a win-win-win where the patient wins, the payer wins, and the provider wins? And I think an on-site primary care clinic is one of the best ways to achieve that goal. Now, why did it grow and grow so fast? As a stop loss underwriter, I would do an aggregate forecast of claims, and that became the budget. And then each quarter, we would compare actuals to the budget. And good things happened. We found that within 18 months, the typical claim trend had been cut in half. And after about 36 months, it had gone close to zero. And it gets into 5 years or more with an on-site clinic, the trend has become negative. That is, an employer is paying less today per employee per year than they were 10 years ago.
Now, do you think a big part of that, Ernie, is because it's right there, right? So as an employee, I don't have to travel far, right? I'm assuming it's much easier to make an appointment. It's right there on site where they work. Is that part of it, or is a bigger part of it? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you this. Are there co-pays and deductibles when it comes to an office visit? So when a patient does go in and see a doctor on site, is it cost them less money or any money out of their pocket? Is that a tribute to better utilization? What do you think triggers the reasons why patients go to on-site clinics? There are better outcomes, higher quality, and at the end of the day, actually lower costs over time.
Adam, you have named the key ingredients for an employee or a family member to try us out with an on-site clinic. That is, no copay, no deductible, no wait. These are scheduled appointments. If you have an appointment at 9 o'clock, you're seen at 9 o'clock. If you're 2 minutes late, then we're going to be talking with the staff on why that's happening. If you need medication, you walk out with it at no cost.
Your facilities can dispense as well as write scripts.
That's correct.
You're aware you can't do that in all states, right? Like Massachusetts, we don't allow that. Our doctors are not allowed to dispense drugs, just write the script. There's a middleman, right? Like CVS or Walgreens. So you're obviously operating in states that allow physicians to dispense.
That's correct. Massachusetts, Texas, Montana do not permit a provider to dispense. When there's sufficient critical mass, we will create a registered pharmacy. In order to achieve that goal, it costs more, but the goal is there. Now, when you remove these copays and deductibles and these other nice features, here's what happens, Adam. We find that in the first year, 1 out of 5 appointments are made by a patient who has not seen a doctor in over 10 years.
Wow.
And so something as modest as a $20 copay or a wait or other similar kind of things can keep someone from getting care that they need.
And if they don't get that care, it causes bigger complications, bigger issues, so that eventually they're in that emergency room, which is going to cost 20 times what it would have cost just to walk into the on-site clinic.
Exactly.
From a financial standpoint, it makes sense. And from a health standpoint, you're able to see things. Your doctors are able to pinpoint issues way before they'll ever see them in an emergency room after the person already has a heart attack. So it makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. Now, how do you differentiate what you do? Now, again, you've been doing this for a long time. You mentioned over 20 years, right? We all hear about direct primary care, right? It's the newest thing. It's out there now. I mean, it's been out there for a little while. But what's the biggest differentiator between on-site clinics and direct primary care facilities? As you know, we don't have an on-site clinic here at Phia, but we do have direct primary care that's within 2 miles away, where we pay for our employees on a monthly PPM basis to have access to a direct primary care physician, no copay, no deductible. Is the only difference one is on-site, one's not? Or are there other differences that you can attribute as well?
There are similarities and there are dissimilarities. The similarities would be the same if the DPC physician is treating the patient who is a chronic patient. Chronic patients account for over 85% of total cost. So the diabetic, the hypertensive, the COPD patient, that's where our costs are coming from, inpatient, outpatient, specialty. So if the primary care treating the chronic patient, that will have a tremendous impact on overall cost, whether it's DPC or on-site clinic. Actually, I think that on-site clinics is an intense form of DPC.
Makes a lot of sense. I agree with that too. Now, a couple of things I want to bring up, and let's go back to the beginning. You talked about the fact that you were in the MGU world, right? Underwriting.
Yes.
What made you start the first one? How'd that happen? I mean, it seems like a big jump from underwriting MGU to now you have an on-site clinic. I mean, that doesn't seem like they two fit together. How'd that occur?
As I looked at the aggregate reports for self-funded employers, we stop-loss providers could at best impact maybe 1, 2, 3%, maybe add on some cost containment features, but it was still a very small step in the overall management of the self-funded healthcare plan. There was a time when I thought, let's bring in evidence. Let's bring in evidence-based medical guidelines. And I worked with a group to gather data from OHSU, Oregon Health Sciences, from Vanderbilt, Duke, Emory, NYU, Mount Sinai, and their academic physicians contributed and wrote over 118 guidelines on osteoporosis, congestive heart failure, and what's the best way to treat. And you know what, Adam? The company went out of business. Nobody wanted EBM, evidence-based medicine. And I said, okay, if I can look at it mathematically from an aggregate perspective and say something's got to change, and EBM is being ignored, if you've got an on-site clinic, you've got all 3 Ps working together, the patient, the provider, and the physician. Now the physician will listen to you because you got evidence-based medicine. So let's infuse the way that they operate with best practices. Let's leave it up to the physician and the patient with knowledge to make good decisions. That's been a wonderful achievement, and it's one of those factors that has made a difference.
Now, when you started it, were there other organizations already doing this? That's first part. Second is, what do you think the one key reason your business has prospered over the past few decades?
The number one reason is to focus on the chronic patient. Almost every investor has gone out and invested in urgent care.
Exactly.
Minute clinics, take care clinics.
The one and dones.
The
In
one
and
and
out.
dones. The
Right.
one and dones. And yes, Adam, that's where frequency is, and it's where people want to respond, but that's not where the cost is. Those costs added up, all the ones and dones, is maybe 15%. Did you know that diabetes alone accounts for over 12% of America's spend?
No idea.
So
Did not know that.
if you're not managing the chronic patient, you're not impacting the self-funded healthcare plan.
Very well said. Were there other organizations doing what you did 20 years ago? Or were you the first?
I think that we were the first on-site clinic that focused on chronic care. I was a fan of the patient-centered medical home, where patients choose the on-site clinic for all their care, all their family care. And I was surprised at the number that after 12 months of opening a clinic, 60% of the employees named us their primary care provider, a
Wow.
stunning number. Therefore, we can either manage or influence the majority of care, whether it goes to specialty or inpatient, outpatient, etc.
The gatekeeper.
Well said. It is an HMO, the old school HMO gatekeeper concept, but the patient makes a voluntary choice to use us or not.
Exactly. And I would think it's a big benefit that you know the health plan. Like you understand what their plan looks like. You understand the schedule of benefits. So you understand out-of-pocket expense. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about it is as the gatekeeper, you obviously are referring people to high quality facilities, potentially low cost facilities as well. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, the next question I'm going to ask you, I could have asked you just this one question and talked for 2 hours, all right? But I'm going to ask it anyways. And I'm not talking necessarily about your company or your clinics, just in general. What has changed over the past 20 to 30 years, whether it's in the self-funded industry, interactions with TPAs, brokers, employers? In your mind, what's the biggest difference, whether it's negative or positive, that's influenced our industry over the past few decades? What's the biggest difference today?
I believe a culprit is HIPAA and the protection of privacy. The employer is barred from seeing almost every bit of information that is PHI. I recognize there's a designated HIPAA privacy officer who can see anything. However, they rarely do because the vendors, the TPAs, the ASOs, and others say, sorry, you can't see it. But here's an employer who's paying the bill and cannot see the data in order to manage it. And often that bill is the second or third largest cost component on the balance sheet in P&L.
How in the world can you manage your risk if you can't see what your risks are?
You're right.
How do you design a plan document to address and mitigate those risks? The data tells you the story. That's the bottom line. And not having access to that data defeats the purpose, I think, of self-funding in the first place, right? It's where you're empowered to take control over your healthcare expenses to do what's best for your employees and their families. And it's hard to do that, like you mentioned, when it comes to all the privacy rules or even the illusion or the suggestion. I mean, I think a lot of times, many of these vendors, et cetera, organizations utilize HIPAA and privacy as a way to cover for themselves into not sharing information that they know they should share in the first place.
And let's use a shining example of where the employer stood up and is managing the plan aggressively. The Phia group, your group, as you have organized pregnancies to go to A over B, and the driver is, Pampers.
Right.
As you have looked at a variety of things, you are as aggressive an employer as I've seen. And how can you do this, Adam, if all this PHI is barred from you?
Exactly. No, the funny thing you say that is because one of the big things I talk about now is mandatory workshops. We do every 6 months a mandatory workshop where everyone at the company, we even invite dependents to join online, where we talk about the biggest cost drivers, new benefits, new efficiencies, just new things that can be done, whether it's through a prescription drug program, ways to purchase drugs online or offshore, or just different vendors we utilize. It's mandatory. And it's not just part of an annual, enrollment 10-minute meeting. Think about it. How much time and money is spent to train people on their core job? Yet when it comes to the second or third biggest expense of an organization, they gloss over it like it's nothing. So we spend just as much time and effort on ensuring that our people understand the benefits, cost containment opportunities, incentives for them to actually make money by saving money for the plan. We put that in there and have just as much emphasis on that as training them to do their jobs, as their self-evaluations or their annual reviews. It's no different. So, and that's something I can tell you, those workshops are not being done by a vast majority of self-funded employers, even though I truly feel they should be.
Absolutely. And here is a burning question. Have any of your employees or family members complained about PHI being breached or violated as a result of your aggressive 6-month programs?
No, because we're not sharing any individual person's claim. We're talking about these are the types of claims that we see. Here's what's coming in. We have, let's say, for example, we have identified, 22% of our people went to an emergency room that they could have went to an urgent care setting or saw their primary care doctor, right? We also expose those hospitals that make these fake urgent care clinics, but they're truly emergency rooms, just not connected to the hospital. They build no different than an emergency room, but they pose and look like urgent care facility from the outside perspective. So anything tied to healthcare, whether it's insulin. I mean, right now we know that insulin costs have gone up. We're seeing that more and more doctors are charging for that. Like whatever it is, if it ties to healthcare and it's going to affect their bottom line and their health benefit experience, we want to make sure that they're aware of it and they're up to speed on it.
Well, it's important for your listeners, people who are listening today, to hear that you can be aggressive and manage the plan and break through that no PHI barrier. Don't let it stand in the way.
I agree 100%. And I think too many people are afraid of that without actually knowing what PHI is and what it's not. Taking out all personal private health insurance information, taking out member names, ID numbers, all that, and just leaving the raw data. There's no PHI violation, but look at the raw data file itself. It will tell you a story of your population as a whole, not the story in the individual person. My last question, Ernie, if you don't mind. Okay, it's a two-parter again. One, why are you still working, man? I mean, you don't need to be doing this. And if you weren't working, what is it that you do for fun? But I really want to know why you're still working, because I have a feeling that I'm going to be in the same shoes as you a few short years from now.
Adam, I'm going to be working 2 or 3 days after I die. As I look in the Bible, there is no retirement plan that I read anywhere. And I try to use that word as a guide. And there are so many projects that need to take place, that I want to take place, I want to be a participant in. That's a huge motivation. The newsletter is a give back to the industry. But the attempt is, the hope, the goal is to raise someone's level of interest, knowledge, education, and try something that can make us better.
Love it. Love it. So, Ernie, I'm going to ask you one more question. I know I said it was the last one, but I have to ask. What's that one moment in your career that you're just most proud of? Whatever it is, whether it's a launch of your first website, I don't know. Going back over your illustrious career, is there something that just sticks out in your mind that you'll never forget? It had that, whether it's goosebumps, the hair raised on your arm, just any moment that you could share with our listeners.
Oh, goodness. There are several goosebump moments. The first is a large distributor of automobiles, a Mercedes, who came to us and said, "You told us our cost next year would be X. I didn't believe you, but they are below X. We're going to check it again." He continued to say that over a 5-year period. He then said at the end of 5 years, "No vendor has ever made a commitment as you have and have delivered and exceeded the expectations. Thank you." But one more chill bump moment was my son, who is now 26. He's working in New York for Bloomberg. Said, "Dad, I know you've got a clinic for Bloomberg, and I've been there. And I think that it's great. It meets my needs. We caught some conditions early. Good job." Well, Adam, it just became personal.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome, Ernie. And I appreciate you sharing that with myself and with our listeners. So, Ernie, any last words, my friend?
Well, to you, Adam, who is a brilliant idol that I look to, and I love to tell the story of your 4 kids where you were trying to have a child. You ultimately did, but in the process of adopting, and then all of a sudden the mother says, "I've got 2 more," and you have 4 kids all the same age. You rock.
My kids are 9, 8, and the twins will be 7 next month. So, yeah. So, in about a month, there'll be 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, and twin 7-year-olds. And I love every minute of it, man. Not every minute. I'm going to take that back. I love most minutes of it. How's that?
It's beautiful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed our special guest today, Ernie Clevenger. He's the man, the myth, the legend. And I was honored just to have the opportunity to speak with him for a couple minutes. So on behalf of Ernie and myself, thank you for empowering your plans with the Phia Group and listening to the Book of Russo podcast. Have a great day.